Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The Encounter. In the vast and unpredictable expanse of the universe, Earth had long been considered a relatively insignificant planet, a tiny speck among countless stars. Its inhabitants, humanity, were still discovering their place in the galaxy. Yet, a select few knew Earth's true potential, especially when a seemingly harmless encounter with an alien species would set the stage for humanity's first real test on the cosmic stage. The story begins with Captain Aaron Solis, a seasoned starship commander, leading a diplomatic mission to negotiate peace with the Thrylex, a race of towering, hyper-intelligent, and physically dominant beings from the distant planet Vrax. Known for their cruelty in intergalactic politics, the Thrylex had only recently opened the doors for communication, and humanity had been eager to gain their trust, hoping to prevent future conflict. Aaron and his team arrived on Vrax's orbiting space station, a massive structure of obsidian metal that dwarfed the size of Earth's largest cities. The station buzzed with the hum of advanced technology, its design sleek and intimidating, as though it was a fortress prepared for any threat. The air was thick with tension as Aaron and his team stepped off their transport, escorted by Thrylex guards. At first glance, the Thrylex were terrifying. Towering at least 10 feet tall, their exoskeletons shimmered in hues of metallic black and deep purple, their faces inscrutable behind glowing, bioluminescent eyes. Their presence commanded fear and respect, and it was in this environment that Aaron would meet someone who would forever change the course of human history. They were led into a grand hall, and there she stood, Commander Genera of the Thrylex, the first and only female leader to hold such power in their species. A vision of perfection in the eyes of her people, Genera was an imposing figure. Her physique, more muscular than any human could ever imagine, rippled with the grace of a hunter and the poise of royalty. Her deep violet exoskeleton, a symbol of her status, glistened under the station's lights. Her eyes, two pools of golden fire, regarded the humans with a strange, calculating interest. "You must be the humans I've heard so much about." Genera's voice was a rich, melodic hum, tinged with an amused undertone. "I must admit, I didn't expect your species to be so fragile." Aaron stood tall, trying to mask the unease that settled in his chest. Despite his many years of military experience, there was something about her gaze that made him feel smaller, weaker. The vastness of her intellect and power was almost palpable in the air. "We come in peace," Aaron said, maintaining his diplomatic tone, his voice firm despite the uncertainty that threatened to seep into it. Genera's laughter rang out, a sound that sent shivers down his spine. "Peace? How quaint." She stepped closer, her massive form towering over him, her presence almost overwhelming. "Your species is so small, Captain. So delicate. You cannot even imagine what power truly feels like." The words stung, but Aaron held his ground. "We may be small, but we have something your species doesn't: the will to endure. We believe we can offer you something of value." Genera's golden eyes flickered with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "Endure? You are but children, clinging to a fragile existence. I do not doubt your tenacity, but in the end your weaknesses will be your undoing." Before Aaron could respond, Genera stepped back, her gaze flicking over the human diplomats as though evaluating them. "Tell me, Captain," she continued, her voice softening into a teasing purr, "do you truly believe you can impress me? You are so small, so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. What could you possibly offer to someone like me?" Aaron knew this was a test, and while his heart raced, his mind worked furiously to find a response that would both satisfy her curiosity and prove humanity's worth. He had heard rumors of the Thryalex's ability to judge a species based on their perceived value, something more complex than mere strength or intelligence. "We may be small, but we have the capability to adapt," Aaron said, his voice unwavering. "And we have a fierce resolve. We are capable of extraordinary things when pushed to our limits." Genera studied him with a sharp intensity, her lips curling into a slight, almost predatory smile. "Fascinating," she murmured, her gaze dropping to his chest as though contemplating the fragility of his human form. "Perhaps there's more to you than meets the eye." But then, with a swift motion, she towered over him once more, her voice becoming more condescending. "Though I cannot imagine how you would ever satisfy my desires, Captain. You are too small, too weak, to even begin to comprehend what I truly crave." Aaron's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of her words threatening to crush him. But he refused to back down. "Don't mistake our size for weakness," he said, his voice cold and sharp. "We may be small, but we have proven time and again that humanity has the strength to overcome even the most impossible of odds. Genera tilted her head, clearly intrigued by his defiance. We shall see, human. We shall see if your species can truly prove itself worthy of my attention. As she turned away, the weight of her words hung heavily in the air, leaving the humans standing there in silence. The challenge had been set, and the future of their species rested on their ability to rise above their limitations and prove their worth. But deep down, Aaron knew that this encounter was only the beginning. Whatever Genera's desires were, whatever tests lay ahead, humanity's greatest strength had always been the ability to rise from the ashes. And now, they would have to prove that even in the face of a seemingly insurmountable foe, Earth's small and fragile inhabitants could accomplish the impossible. The Thrylex had underestimated humanity before. They would not make that mistake again. The challenge? The atmosphere aboard the Vrak space station felt heavy, suffocating even as Captain Aaron Solis and his team gathered in a private chamber later that evening. The walls, adorned with alien technology, glowed faintly in the dim light, casting long shadows over their faces. Everyone was still processing the encounter with Genera, none more so than Aaron, who could still feel the weight of her piercing gaze upon him. I've never seen anything like her, muttered Lieutenant Alana Drake, breaking the tense silence. Her voice was low, but the disbelief in it was palpable. How does anyone survive in her presence? She's overwhelming. I think survived is the wrong word, Aaron replied, rubbing his forehead. We've been underestimated from the start. But we've got to prove we're more than just fragile creatures with a few tricks up our sleeves. How? Alana asked, a hint of frustration creeping into her tone. She's not even pretending to consider us equals. You heard what she said, too small, too weak. She's testing us, and if she decides we're not worth her time, this entire mission is over. Aaron took a deep breath. We have to show them that we can handle more than they think. That's the only way we'll make any headway with the Thrylex. Sure, she's toying with us, but she's intrigued. I can feel it. The rest of the team nodded slowly, but the air remained thick with doubt. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that the Thrylex were formidable. And Genera, she was something else entirely. As the hours dragged on, Aaron couldn't shake the sense of dread that had settled in his chest. Genera's words echoed in his mind. Asterisk, you are too small to satisfy my desires. Asterisk, the veiled threat beneath her casual dismissal gnawed at him. What could she have meant by that? It sounded like a challenge, but it also hinted at something far darker. Suddenly, the door to their chamber slid open, and a holographic message appeared before them. The voice of Genera resonated from the speaker, her tone cold, yet somehow laced with amusement. Captain Solis, I have decided to extend an invitation. You and your crew are to participate in a series of trials. Should you succeed, you will earn my attention. If you fail, I will consider our negotiation finished. The transmission cut off, leaving only the hum of the room in its wake. What kind of trials? Alana asked, her voice tight. The next day, Aaron and his team were escorted through the station's labyrinthine halls, their Thrylex guards leading them in eerie silence. The air seemed to grow colder with each step, as though they were venturing deeper into enemy territory. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a massive arena, an open space surrounded by towering walls, all of which were etched with symbols and runes that none of the humans could decipher. Genera was waiting for them in the center of the arena, her towering form a silent testament to the physical superiority of her species. The sight of her caused an involuntary shiver to run down Aaron's spine. So, she said, her voice echoing across the vast expanse. I have designed this challenge to test your resilience, your ingenuity, and most importantly, your strength of spirit. You will face obstacles, traps, and each other. You must survive, and perhaps, you will learn something about yourselves along the way. The humans exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't going to be a simple game. Genera gestured to the arena's edge, where a series of large gates began to rise. The first trial will begin shortly. Prepare yourselves. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her form disappearing into the shadows. The gates opened, revealing a series of towering structures, strange alien contraptions that seemed to pulse with energy, shifting and transforming in ways that defied understanding. Some were mechanical, others organic, but all of them emanated an overwhelming sense of danger. What the hell are we supposed to do with this? Alana muttered, staring at the shifting maze before them. The first trial began as soon as they stepped into the arena. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and suddenly, enormous mechanical beasts, like a fusion of insectoid creatures and heavy artillery, emerged from the shadows. They hissed, their red eyes glowing menacingly as they advanced toward the humans. "Move!" Aaron shouted, pushing his team into action. The beasts were relentless, each one equipped with weapons and shields. They weren't just mindless constructs, they were designed to be nearly indestructible. The team fought bravely, using their limited resources and the environment to their advantage. Aaron found himself slipping into the mindset of a soldier once more, relying on his instincts to guide him. But every time they seemed to gain ground, another beast appeared, and the odds were stacked against them. Alana managed to disable one of the mechanical beasts with a well-placed shot, but even that small victory felt hollow. There was no time to savor it. As they continued to battle their way through the arena, Aaron began to understand the deeper challenge Genera had set for them. This wasn't just about physical strength, it was about endurance. The Thrylex wanted to see how much they could take before breaking. Minutes stretched into hours and the fatigue began to show. The humans had already sustained injuries and exhaustion was beginning to cloud their minds. Yet they pressed on. They couldn't afford to stop. They couldn't afford to show weakness. In the midst of the chaos, Aaron's thoughts flickered back to Genera. Her words from earlier reverberated in his mind. Asterisk, you are too small to satisfy my desires. Asterisk, there was something else in her tone, something more dangerous, as if she were testing them not just physically but mentally. Were they truly ready to face her? Were they truly ready to show the Thrylex that humanity had what it took to endure? They had no choice. The trial would continue until they either succeeded or perished. The last mechanical beast fell with a resounding crash, and Aaron's team stood panting, battered but alive. Their victory was hard-won, but it was a victory nonetheless. Is this all you've got, Genera? Aaron muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing toward the unseen alien commander. But as the dust settled, Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Genera was watching them closely, and the true challenge had yet to come. The second trial. The air in the arena was thick with tension, and the aftermath of the first trial left the team weary, their bodies battered from the mechanical beasts they had just defeated. Despite their exhaustion, they couldn't afford to rest. Genera had made it clear that there would be no reprieve. Aaron stood at the front, scanning the horizon for any signs of the next challenge. The arena had fallen silent, save for the occasional echo of their footsteps on the cracked, metallic floor. His crew members, Lieutenant Alana Drake, Sergeant Rios, and Dr. Alara Jenkins, stood with him, each trying to catch their breath and gather their bearings. Though the first trial had tested their physical endurance, the second would surely demand more. They had barely escaped with their lives. "Where is she?" Alana asked, her voice tight with frustration. "This is just a game to her, isn't it?" Aaron turned to her, offering a tight, weary smile. "It's not a game. This is a test of who we are, of how far we're willing to go. Genera wants to see how much we can take before we break." Rios grunted, clutching a bleeding shoulder where one of the mechanical beasts had torn through his uniform. "Well, I don't know how much more of this I can take. We'll take whatever she throws at us," Aaron said firmly, his voice cutting through the mounting tension. "We don't back down." The ground beneath them trembled again, and the giant gates at the far end of the arena began to rumble open. The sounds of grinding metal and hissing steam filled the air, sending a ripple of unease through the group. Aaron tensed, instinctively reaching for his sidearm, though he knew that nothing in this arena would be as simple as pulling a trigger. Before they could react, a new threat emerged. From the shadows, a series of massive, serpentine creatures slithered into view. Their sleek, scale-covered bodies glistened in the dim light, and their glowing red eyes locked onto the humans. They moved with an eerie fluidity, their long bodies coiling and uncoiling with disturbing precision. Each one was easily 30 feet long, with teeth like razor blades and claws sharp enough to tear through metal. "These aren't just machines," Rio said, his voice filled with both awe and terror. "They're alive." Aaron's eyes narrowed as he studied the creatures. The Thrylex were known for their cunning. This was no random assortment of beasts. Genera was orchestrating something far more intricate. The creatures began to move toward them, their eyes never leaving their prey. It was clear that they weren't merely testing their physical strength now, they were testing their capacity for strategy, for coordination, and for the will to survive against an enemy that was not only stronger but smarter than they were. "We need to split up," Aaron ordered quickly. "Don't engage them all at once. Keep your distance and use the environment. We'll take them down one by one." The group nodded, each of them understanding the gravity of the situation. With a shared look of determination, they spread out across the arena. The serpentine creatures moved swiftly, their tails whipping through the air, clearing the ground as they advanced toward their targets. Aaron led the charge, moving toward one of the creatures as it lunged toward him. He sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the strike, and fired at its head. The creature let out an ear-splitting screech, but the shot barely grazed its scales. It was almost as though the creature had anticipated the attack. "You've got to be kidding me," Aaron muttered, quickly diving behind a set of abandoned scaffolding to avoid another strike. The creature was circling, waiting for him to make another move. It was no longer about brute force. This fight required precision, careful timing, and above all, patience. Alana and Rios were engaged with other creatures. Alana ducked under a lunging attack, her blaster aimed at the creature's underside. A burst of plasma hit its vulnerable belly, causing the beast to writhe in pain, but it didn't fall. Rios was faring better, using his explosives to set traps. He had rigged one of the arena's old energy conduits to explode as one of the serpents neared, and when it detonated, the creature shrieked in agony, momentarily stunned by the blast. Dr. Ilara Jenkins, ever the strategist, had managed to find higher ground and was using her knowledge of the arena systems to manipulate the environmental hazards. She activated a series of mechanical traps, sending spikes shooting up from the floor to impale one of the creatures, although it only slowed it down rather than killing it outright. Aaron's creature lunged again, its massive jaws snapping shut just inches from his face. He pulled back just in time and retaliated, aiming at its eyes with a precise shot. The creature recoiled, momentarily blinded, but it quickly recovered. The Thrylex were not just testing their strength, they were testing how adaptable humanity could be when faced with an enemy that knew their every move before they even made it. Aaron knew they couldn't keep this up for much longer. The creatures were relentless, and their attacks seemed to become more calculated with every passing second. They were outmatched in terms of strength and speed, and the environment was growing increasingly dangerous as more traps activated under Genera's command. He heard a shout from Alana and turned just in time to see one of the serpents coiling around her, its jaws closing in on her. With no hesitation, Aaron dashed forward, firing his weapon in quick bursts. The shots hit the creature's exposed flank, but it wasn't enough to stop it. He reached them just in time, slamming his shoulder into the creature's body and forcing it to release Alana. "Get up. Move," Aaron yelled, helping her to her feet. Alana staggered, winded but alive. They both turned to face the creature, which was now angrier than ever, its glowing eyes fixed on them. But before they could react, the creature suddenly froze, its body going stiff as though caught in a trap. Aaron didn't wait for an explanation. "Ilara," he shouted, realizing that their strategist had pulled off another trick. "Concentrate fire on its head." Ilara's voice crackled over the comms, a note of urgency in her tone. "Now?" The humans fired in unison, unleashing a flurry of shots. It was enough to take the creature down, and with a final shriek, it collapsed onto the ground in a heap of twitching limbs. Aaron's chest heaved as he watched the creature fall, but there was no time to celebrate. The remaining serpents were still circling, and more were emerging from the shadows. "How many of these things does she have?" Rios grunted, looking around, his hands trembling from exhaustion. Genera's voice echoed throughout the arena, her laughter tinged with something dark and knowing. "You've done well so far, humans. But tell me, can you keep going? Can you survive me?" Aaron's eyes narrowed. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. This was no longer just a test. Genera was trying to break them, to prove that humanity didn't belong on the galactic stage. But Aaron wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. "No," he said quietly, his voice filled with resolve. "We will not break. We will not fail." He turned to his crew, each of them battered but determined. They had one more trial to go, and no matter what, they were going to survive it. The Thrylex may have underestimated them before, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. And neither would Genera. The final test. The arena was bathed in a cold, ominous glow as the final serpentine creatures slithered back into the shadows. Their failure to break the humans had been evident, and for a brief moment, the only sound that filled the arena was the heavy breathing of Captain Aaron Solis and his crew. Their bodies were bloodied and bruised, each of them struggling to stay on their feet after hours of relentless combat. Yet, as they stood in the aftermath of the second trial, none of them dared to let their guard down. Genera's voice echoed again, this time in a softer, almost amused tone. "You are far more resilient than I expected, humans. But your trials are not yet over." Aaron's gut twisted with a mixture of frustration and dread. There had been a moment of hope, a fleeting sense of victory after they had defeated the last of the serpents, but that hope was dashed with Genera's chilling words. She was toying with them, pushing them to their limits, and beyond. "What now?" Alana asked, her voice rough from exertion. but sharp with defiance. Are you going to send more of those monsters after us? Perhaps, Genera's voice answered, almost a whisper in the air, a promise of something far worse. But I think you've proven your worth in that regard. No, this next trial will be different. It will test your minds, your hearts, your souls. Aaron clenched his jaw, the weight of her words sinking in. He had suspected this moment would come. Genera had shown them cruelty, had pushed them physically, but it was clear that this next trial was something far more insidious. He exchanged a glance with his team. They had been through hell together already, but this was going to be unlike anything they had encountered before. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook again, and the arena began to transform. The metallic walls shifted, bending and contorting as though they had a life of their own. The air grew colder, and the familiar sounds of machinery were replaced by the distant hum of something alien, something alive. Then, without warning, the ground split open and a dark, swirling vortex appeared in the center of the arena. "Step forward, humans," Genera's voice boomed, now a command that left no room for refusal. "Step into the vortex and face what lies within. Only those who truly understand themselves and each other will survive this trial." "Understand ourselves?" Rios muttered. "What the hell does that mean?" Before anyone could respond, Aaron stepped forward. He knew they had no choice. They had come this far and they were not going to back down now. Slowly, his crew followed him, each of them standing tall despite their exhaustion, their faces grim but resolute. The vortex seemed to pulse with energy, almost like a living entity waiting to consume them. Without a word, Aaron led the team into the swirling mass of darkness, unsure of what they would find on the other side. The moment they crossed the threshold, everything around them shifted. The arena disappeared, replaced by a vast, endless expanse. The sky above them was a sickly shade of green, and the ground beneath their feet felt unstable, as though it might collapse at any moment. In the distance, massive, jagged rocks jutted out from the earth, and strange, twisted shapes lurked in the shadows. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and Aaron felt his chest tighten, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "This place, it feels wrong," Alana said, her voice trembling. "It's like it's alive." "Stay focused," Aaron commanded, his tone sharp. "We don't know what this is yet, but we can't afford to lose our heads. We move together and we move fast." They began to move, cautiously at first, their eyes darting around, searching for any sign of danger. The landscape was alien, unfamiliar, and it felt as though it was watching them, every step they took echoing in the stillness. Time seemed to stretch, and every shadow seemed to shift with a life of its own. As they ventured deeper into the strange world, the landscape began to shift again. This time, the air grew colder, and strange figures appeared out of the mist. Human-shaped, but something was wrong about them. Their faces were obscured, and their forms seemed to flicker, like they were made of smoke. The figures approached, their movements unnaturally smooth as though they were gliding over the ground. Aaron's heart pounded in his chest, his hand instinctively going to the blaster at his side. But before he could speak, one of the figures spoke, its voice eerily calm and familiar. "You've come to prove your worth, Captain Solis," it said, its voice a distorted version of his own. "But can you survive your own inner darkness?" Aaron froze, his stomach twisting. The figure before him, it was him. But it wasn't. It was an image, a projection of his own mind, twisted into something darker. The figure's lips curled into a mockery of a smile. "Your greatest fear. Your greatest weakness. Can you conquer it? Or will you let it destroy you?" Aaron's mind raced. He knew this was no ordinary trial. It wasn't about physical strength or endurance. This was a test of his very soul. His greatest fear? The fear of failure. Of letting down his crew. Of not being strong enough to lead them through this nightmare. The fear that they would perish because of his mistakes. His hands clenched into fists. He refused to let this thing, this distorted version of himself, have power over him. "I am not afraid of you," Aaron growled, his voice steady. "You are nothing but a shadow. I know my fears and I will not let them control me." The figure laughed, the sound hollow and mocking. "Do you truly believe that, Captain? You cannot run from your past. You cannot escape the choices you've made." Aaron's chest tightened as memories flooded back. Memories of past failures, of missions gone wrong, of comrades lost. He had always carried the weight of those failures, but now they threatened to overwhelm him. "You are nothing," Aaron shouted, stepping forward. "You have no hold over me." In that moment, the figure's form flickered and disintegrated, dissolving into the air like mist. The oppressive feeling in the air lightened, and the landscape shifted once again. But the trial was not over. The other figures had begun to approach Alana, Rios, and Dr. Jenkins, each of them confronting their own personal fears. Alana's figure was a twisted version of her younger brother, whom she had failed to protect during a previous mission. Rios faced a specter of his own broken family, lost in the chaos of war. Dr. Jenkins was confronted with the loss of her research, the very work that had given her life meaning. Aaron turned to see how his team was holding up. They were struggling, but they were fighting back, refusing to succumb to the illusions of their own minds. He knew that if they were going to survive this, they would have to do it together. "Stay strong," he yelled, his voice cutting through the haze. "We're not alone in this." Slowly, the figures began to fade, their hold on each of them weakening as they fought back against their fears. One by one, the twisted projections disappeared, leaving the humans standing in the center of the dark landscape, their breathing heavy, their faces grim. Genera's voice filled the air again, this time with a note of something approaching respect. "Impressive, Captain Solis. Impressive, humans. You have proven that you can face yourselves, and in doing so, you have earned the right to stand before me." The arena around them began to dissolve, and they were once again standing in the Vrak space station. But this time the atmosphere was different, heavier, more serious. Genera was there, standing before them, her expression inscrutable. "You have passed the trials," she said, her voice devoid of mockery. "But the true test has only just begun." Aaron and his crew stood tall, their resolve steeled. They had proven themselves in ways they never thought possible. They had faced their darkest fears, survived Genera's trials, and come out stronger on the other side. But now the real battle would begin. The choice. The space around them flickered and hummed as Genera's final words echoed in the air. "The true test has only just begun." The oppressive silence that followed her declaration made the crew uneasy, but Aaron stood resolute. There was no way they had endured so much only to be abandoned at the last moment. This was far from over. Genera, the alien queen whose challenge had pushed them to the brink, now towered before them, her form emanating an ethereal glow. She seemed almost to float in the air, her eyes, blazing with intelligence and cruelty, locked on Aaron as though he were the only one who mattered in this entire arena. "You have shown remarkable tenacity," she continued, her voice filled with cold admiration. "But I am not finished. There is still one final decision to make, Captain Solis." The words hung in the air like a deadly fog. Aaron could feel his heart rate quicken, but he didn't flinch. His crew stood in formation behind him, just as determined as he was. They had endured impossible trials together, and nothing could break their unity now. Genera's smile grew as she gestured with one hand, and the space around them began to warp again, transforming into a massive chamber. The walls were adorned with intricate alien carvings that seemed to pulse with life. In the center of the room stood two towering, ancient-looking pillars, each one crowned with a glowing orb-like structure. The air in the chamber hummed with an unnatural energy. "Before you lies a choice," Genera said, her voice deepening, becoming more ominous. "One of these orbs will grant you unimaginable power, the ability to control life and death itself. The other will take everything from you, your lives, your future, your very existence. Choose wisely, for your fate and the fate of your people are intertwined with this moment." Aaron's mind raced as he considered the implications. A choice between ultimate power and utter annihilation. It was a temptation few could resist. Yet, something in his gut told him that this was not a simple game. Genera's eyes glittered with a malevolent curiosity, watching them as though they were nothing more than insects under a magnifying glass. "You've already proven yourselves worthy in ways no others have," she continued, her voice like honey laced with poison. "But there is one final truth you must face. What will you do with such power should you claim it? Will you wield it as a force for good, or succumb to the corruption it promises?" Alana, standing beside Aaron, spoke first, her voice low but firm. "We didn't come this far to let you manipulate us with some twisted game, Genera. You think we'll fall for this?" Genera's expression hardened for a moment, the flicker of frustration fleeting. But then she regained her composure. "I know what you seek, human. You crave peace, yet war follows you. You fight for those you love, but what happens when that fight requires a cost you cannot bear?" Aaron stepped forward, ignoring the sharp sting of doubt creeping into his mind. "Enough," he said, his voice commanding. "We've faced down your trials and stood together through it all. We will make our own fate, and you will not control it." Genera's lips curled into a thin smile. "So be it." With a wave of her hand, the two orbs began to glow brighter, their light intensifying until it nearly blinded them. One orb was a deep, shimmering black, while the other radiated a brilliant, almost blinding white light. Both seemed to pulse with an energy that made the air around them crackle. "Choose," Genera intoned, her voice now filled with an eerie finality. "Only one can be touched, only one can be claimed. The power is yours, if you are brave enough to take it." The crew stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Rios shifted uneasily, his hand hovering near his sidearm, though there was no immediate threat. Ilara's brow furrowed, her mind clearly racing through the consequences of each choice. Alana remained stoic, though her eyes flicked back and forth between the two orbs. Aaron stared at the two choices before them, both equally tempting and terrifying. Power. The chance to alter the course of their history, to save humanity from its greatest threats, to ensure peace for future generations. Or destruction, the obliteration of their very existence, the annihilation of everything they had fought for. A sudden bone-chilling thought gripped him. What if Genera had designed this trial to break them down, to force them into a choice that would ultimately destroy them? What if the choice itself was the trap? "Captain," Ilara spoke up, her voice filled with caution, "this doesn't feel right. The balance of power in these orbs, it's too much. I've studied alien artifacts like this before. This is a test of corruption. We don't know the true cost of wielding either of these forces." Aaron met her gaze, her warning ringing in his ears. He understood now. Genera's final trial wasn't just about making a choice. It was about corrupting them. The power to shape reality itself was a dangerous temptation, one that could easily unravel everything they had fought for. If they weren't careful, the cost of choosing either orb could be far greater than anything they had endured up to this point. "This isn't about power," Aaron said quietly, more to himself than to his team. "It's about sacrifice. We've been through too much to let this temptation tear us apart." Suddenly, Genera's voice cut through the air like a whip. "You still don't understand, do you, Captain? You think this trial is about power, about control, about conquering the galaxy. But it is not. It is about you, about who you are when faced with the ultimate temptation. Will you remain human, or will you let your greed and ambition consume you? Choose." Aaron's chest tightened. The pieces were falling into place. Genera wasn't simply offering them a choice between power and destruction. She was asking them to prove that they could resist the lure of absolute control. The trial had always been about testing humanity's moral fiber, not their strength or intellect. The cost of failing was far more than their lives, it was their very souls. He turned to his team, his voice steady but urgent. "We don't need their power. We never did. What makes us human isn't our ability to control the universe, it's our capacity for sacrifice, for choosing what's right, even when we don't know what the cost will be." Alana nodded slowly, her eyes hardening with resolve. "I'm with you, Aaron. No orb, no power. We walk away from this." One by one, the rest of the crew voiced their agreement, each of them standing firm in the face of Genera's dark game. Aaron stepped forward and reached out, not for the orbs, but for the air between them, as though to break the invisible barrier that had kept them trapped in this twisted trial. Genera watched with a mixture of disbelief and admiration as he moved, a silent understanding passing between them. "You pass," Genera said at last, her voice softening. "You have proven your worth. Not through your strength, not through your power, but through your humanity." The room began to dissolve around them, the alien structures fading into nothingness. They were no longer in the trial room, but standing once again in the heart of the Vrak space station. Genera for the first time seemed almost pleased. "You have chosen wisely, Captain Solis," she said with an almost respectful nod. "But remember, true power lies not in domination but in restraint." Aaron and his crew stood together, their resolve unbroken. They had made their choice, and they would live to fight another day. But as Genera's form began to dissolve into the air, a parting thought lingered in Aaron's mind. The real test may have ended, but the war they would face after this was only just beginning. The shifting tide. The transition from the dark, oppressive chamber to the light-filled Vrak station was abrupt. One moment they stood facing Genera, the alien queen whose trials had tested them beyond their limits. The next they were back in the familiar, sterile corridors of the station. Their breath still hung in the air from the tension of the trial, but now, there was a strange stillness to the space around them. Aaron Solis felt the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. He glanced over at his crew, Alana, Rios, Ilara, and Dr. Jenkins. They were all visibly relieved but still on edge, their minds clearly spinning from the harrowing tests they'd faced. They had been through fire, but the war was far from over. Genera's final words echoed in their minds, "True power lies not in domination but in restraint." It was a sentiment they had all felt in their bones, But now that the trial was over, a new question lingered: what came next? "Captain," Alana said, her voice sharp, breaking the silence. "What now? We've passed her trials, but she still seems intent on something." Aaron turned to her, his expression grim. "We don't know Janera's true intentions. She's playing a long game and I'm not sure what that game is yet. But we're no longer her pawns. Whatever comes next, we face it together." A low hum filled the air as the station's lights flickered, a subtle reminder that they weren't alone. It had been days since they'd arrived, and though the station was vast and seemingly endless, there was a pervasive sense of being watched. Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that Janera's trials were merely the beginning of something much larger. They had passed her tests, but now the real challenge awaited. Without warning, a deep, resonant voice reverberated through the air, seemingly from every corner of the station. "You have passed the trials, Captain Solis, and your crew has proven their worth. But this was only the beginning. The real challenge is yet to come." Janera's voice, though calm, carried an air of finality. It was no longer the playful, taunting tone that had echoed through the arena, but one of ominous weight. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had faced trials of strength, endurance, and moral conviction. Now it seemed the true nature of their test would be revealed. "You have earned the right to stand before me, but I will not offer you power or gifts," Janera continued, her voice taking on a sharp, commanding edge. "You have proven yourselves worthy of a far more difficult trial. You will be tested not by what you can conquer but by what you can protect. What will you sacrifice for your people, for your galaxy?" A sharp, sudden tremor ran through the station as Janera's words filled the air. The ground beneath their feet shifted, and the lights flickered again, this time with a more deliberate urgency. It was a signal, Aaron realized. Something was happening. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice steady. "Stay close. We don't know what she's throwing at us next, but we'll face it together." His crew nodded, their expressions serious. They had grown stronger through each trial, their bonds forged in the fires of adversity. But they had never faced a challenge like this before, one that would test not just their physical strength or resolve, but their very souls. Without warning, the walls of the station began to warp and twist, the smooth, metallic surfaces rippling like water. The air grew heavier, and the sounds of distant, echoing footsteps reverberated through the station's hallways. The environment shifted again. This time, the cold, sterile corridors gave way to a vast, sprawling cityscape, one that stretched as far as the eye could see. Towering spires of metal and glass rose up on all sides, their surfaces glowing with the light of 1,000 neon signs. "This isn't possible," Elara murmured, her voice trembling. "This place, this city, it doesn't exist. It's like something out of a simulation." "Keep your wits about you," Aaron replied, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The city felt both familiar and alien at the same time. The architecture was far beyond anything humanity had ever conceived, and yet, there was something almost comforting in the urban chaos around them. As they moved through the cityscape, the crew couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into something far deeper. It wasn't just the physical world that was shifting, it was their understanding of reality itself. The once clear distinction between trial and reality had begun to blur. The line between what was real and what was an illusion had become indistinguishable. At the heart of the city, they found themselves standing in front of a massive, gleaming building, a tower that seemed to rise out of the ground as if it had always been there. It was a marvel of alien engineering, impossibly sleek, with reflective surfaces that shimmered with an unsettling, almost hypnotic quality. "This is it," Rio said quietly, his gaze locked on the building. "This is where she wants us to go." A low, vibrating hum pulsed through the air as the building's doors opened on their own, inviting them inside. With a final glance at each other, the crew entered the tower. As they stepped into the building's lobby, the atmosphere shifted again, the air growing thick with an unnatural energy. The walls around them seemed to pulse, breathing with an almost sentient quality. Janera's voice came through again, though this time, it was not a command. It was a statement, a warning. "Inside this tower lies a choice. It is not one of power, nor one of destruction. It is a choice of sacrifice. You will each face a trial, one that will test not just your will to survive, but your capacity for empathy, for compassion. Only when you make this choice will you understand the true nature of the challenge you have taken on." Aaron felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Empathy? Compassion? These were not qualities that they had needed to survive the previous trials. They had faced monsters, illusions, and tests of strength, but now Janera was asking them to delve deeper into their own humanity. This was no longer about defeating an external enemy. This was about facing the darkest corners of their own hearts, and coming out the other side unchanged. As they ascended the tower's sleek, reflective elevator, the crew fell into an uneasy silence. Each of them knew that the final test was approaching, and none of them were sure what to expect. What would Genera demand of them this time? How could they possibly prepare for a trial of the soul? When the doors opened, they were no longer inside the tower at all. Instead, they stood in the middle of an empty, barren field. There was no sound, no movement, only the oppressive weight of the silence surrounding them. The sky above was an endless expanse of gray, heavy clouds pressing down on the earth like an impending storm. In the center of the field, a single figure stood, an exact replica of Captain Aaron Solis. His doppelganger stood motionless, staring at the crew with cold, lifeless eyes. It was him but not him. A reflection of the man he had become, or perhaps a warning of what he might become. Genera's voice echoed again, this time filled with finality. "This is your test, Captain Solis," she said. "You will face your greatest fear, the man you have become. The sacrifice you must make is not of strength or will, but of your identity. What will you sacrifice to protect those you love? Will you remain yourself, or will you lose everything to save them?" Aaron's heart pounded in his chest as he faced his double. This was the true test of humanity. What would they give up to protect the ones they loved, to fight for a greater cause? Would they sacrifice themselves, their very essence, to preserve the future of their species? His hand hovered over the blaster at his side, but he knew that this trial was not one of combat. It was one of choices that would echo far beyond this moment. He glanced back at his crew, and for the first time he truly understood the weight of Genera's final challenge. To save humanity, to protect his crew, to remain human, he would have to give up everything. And he would. The question was no longer what he was willing to sacrifice, but who. The final decision. The field stretched out before Aaron, empty and silent, save for the sound of his own breath. His doppelganger stood motionless, an exact replica of himself. His features, his posture, his expression. Yet the air around the figure seemed to vibrate with something malevolent. It was him, but it was not. This was the final trial Genera had promised. He could feel it in every fiber of his being. Alana, Rios, Ilara, and Dr. Jenkins stood behind him, their eyes wide, searching the barren landscape. They had already faced horrors together, but this was different. This wasn't about fighting an enemy. This was about fighting themselves. "What do we do now?" Rios's voice was strained, his hand still near his weapon. Is that supposed to be you, Captain?" Aaron didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the figure in front of him, the mirror image of himself, standing in the center of the empty field as if it were just waiting for him to make a move. His heart was heavy with the understanding that this was a test unlike any other they had faced. There would be no weapons drawn, no physical combat. This was a battle of the mind, of the soul, a test of who he truly was, who he would become, and what he was willing to sacrifice for the greater good. "Captain, we faced monsters, we fought to stay alive, but this..." Ilara's voice trailed off as she too watched the doppelganger. "This isn't something we can fight with force." "No," Aaron said quietly, his eyes never leaving the figure. "This is a choice. A choice that's not about power or survival. It's about who we choose to be in the end." The words settled over them like a fog, each of them contemplating their own place in this strange trial. Aaron felt the pressure of Genera's presence, her unseen eyes on them, observing their every move, listening to their every thought. Genera's voice broke through the silence again, cold and commanding. "You stand before your greatest fear, Captain Solis," she said, her words reverberating in the still air. "Not an enemy that can be destroyed with your strength, nor a challenge that can be overcome with your intellect. This is a test of sacrifice. What are you willing to give up to protect those you love? Will you hold on to your identity, your memories, yourself, or will you lose everything to save them?" Aaron's heart thundered in his chest as the weight of her words sank in. This was it. The final choice. The test was not about defeating an external threat, it was about his own soul, about who he was at his core. Could he remain true to himself? Could he make the ultimate sacrifice not with weapons or strategies, but with the very essence of who he was? His double, standing in the center of the field, seemed to move slightly, his eyes now narrowing with an eerie, knowing look. "It's not just about you, Captain," the figure said, its voice identical to Aaron's, but lacking the warmth or humanity that made him who he was. "It's about your crew, your people. You've always fought for them, haven't you? You're always the one willing to put everything on the line. But what if the cost is too great?" The doppelganger's words cut deep, striking at something Aaron hadn't dared to voice aloud. The burden of leadership. The weight of every decision, every life that hung in the balance. Was he willing to lose himself for the sake of those he loved? Would it even be worth it? Could he become something else entirely to save them all? Aaron stepped forward, his hand steady as it rested on the hilt of his weapon. But he didn't draw it. Instead, he took another step closer to the figure. His reflection. His counterpart. The version of him that could have been. One who made choices not out of compassion but out of cold, calculated necessity. "Stop," Aaron said, his voice commanding, yet filled with the uncertainty that gnawed at his insides. "I know what you are. You're a reflection of the choices I've made. You're the part of me that asks what it would cost to protect them. You're the fear of losing myself in the process." The doppelganger smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. "And yet here you are. Still holding on to your humanity, still choosing to protect them over yourself. What makes you think you can continue to carry this burden? You've already sacrificed so much. How much more will you give?" Aaron felt the pressure of his own words pressing down on him. He could see his crew behind him, each of them facing their own struggles, their own fears. Genera's trials had shown them all the cost of survival, the price of their victories. But this was different. This wasn't about what they had to give for the galaxy or the mission. It was about what they had to give to each other. He turned his gaze to his crew, his team, the people who had stood by him, fought with him, and bled for him. They had been through so much, and they were still standing by his side, unbroken. "I'll tell you why," Aaron said, his voice steady now, filled with a conviction that burned deep within him. "Because I'm not alone. I don't have to carry this burden by myself. I have my crew, my family. And so long as I have them, I'll never lose myself. I'll fight for them, yes. But I'll fight to remain human. To be the person who makes the hard choices, not because it's easy, but because it's right." The doppelganger's smirk faltered, just for a moment, before it twisted into something darker. "You think that makes you special? That makes you different? It's weakness, Captain. Weakness to care about them. To care about anything more than your own survival." Aaron's gaze hardened. "That's where you're wrong. It's strength to care. It's strength to love, to protect, to sacrifice. To keep going even when it's easier to give up. That's what makes us human." He stepped closer to the doppelganger, his hand still clenched around his weapon, but his heart focused on something else entirely. "I don't need to destroy you because you're not real. You're just a shadow of the choices I've made. I am the choices I make. And I'm choosing to protect those I love. I'm choosing to be the man who fights for what's right, even when it costs everything." A slow, almost imperceptible shift seemed to ripple through the doppelganger, and for a moment, Aaron thought he saw something like doubt in its eyes. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, replaced by a look of resigned acceptance. The figure faded into nothingness, leaving behind only the empty field. Genera's voice, softer now, filled the space once more. "You have passed the final trial, Captain Solis. You have proven yourself worthy of your humanity. And with it, you have earned the right to lead. But remember, true power does not come from what you can take, but from what you are willing to give up." The weight of her words hung in the air as the field began to dissolve, the empty landscape vanishing into the unknown. Aaron felt the ground beneath his feet shift, and soon they were back in the heart of the Vrak station, standing together as a team once more. Genera's figure materialized before them, her eyes now filled with something akin to respect. "You have chosen wisely. You have chosen to remain human. And that will be your greatest strength in the battles to come." Aaron looked at his crew, his family, and smiled. They had passed the final test, but this was only the beginning. Their journey was far from over. "We're ready," he said, his voice steady, his resolve unshakable. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." And with that, they stepped forward, ready to face the challenges that lay ahead, united in their humanity and their shared purpose. A new dawn. The station around them hummed with quiet anticipation, its vast corridors now echoing with a silence that felt final, yet full of potential. The trial was over, and Genera's final words hung in the air like a reminder of the choices they had made. "You have chosen wisely, and you have chosen to remain human." For Aaron Solis and his crew, the weight of those words would resonate in ways they could only begin to comprehend. What they had faced, the tests of strength, endurance, and intellect, had been difficult, but this final trial was unlike any other. It wasn't just about survival, it was about the essence of who they were as individuals, as human beings, and what they were willing to give up for something greater than themselves. Aaron looked over at his crew. Alana, her face streaked with dirt but her eyes burning with determination. Rios, always the quiet one, his brow furrowed in thought. Ilara, the scientist, her mind still working through the implications of everything that had just happened. And Dr. Jenkins, the heart of their team, always there with a calming presence when the storm raged. They had all been through the trials together, but now they were different. They were stronger not just physically but mentally and emotionally. And most importantly, they were united. Genera stood before them, her alien form still regal and intimidating, but now there was something else in her gaze. Respect. It was clear that the Queen of the Vracs had seen something in them, a glimmer of what made humanity so unique. Not their capacity for destruction, not their technological prowess, but their unyielding drive to protect what they loved, to stand together even when the weight of the universe threatened to break them. "You have proven yourselves, Captain Solis," Genera said, her voice cool but no longer mocking. "The trial was meant to strip away the parts of you that were weak, the parts of you that could have led to your downfall. And you have passed." Aaron nodded, though his mind was still racing. "What now, Genera? What does this mean for us? For humanity?" Genera's eyes flashed with something unreadable, but she didn't move. "Now you are free to make your own choices. I will not command you, nor will I offer you anything more. You have earned the right to chart your own course. The galaxy is full of danger, and your journey will not be easy. But you have shown me the one thing that I have not seen in many species: true strength. You have fought not for domination but for survival. For the love of your people. For the future." Aaron's gaze hardened. "We've learned from the past. We won't let power destroy us, not like it has so many others. But there's still a bigger picture. We're not the only ones facing the darkness." "Indeed," Genera agreed, her voice dipping slightly in tone. "The galaxy is on the brink of change. And you, Captain Solis, will play a part in that change. I have seen the future, and it is not one shaped by war or by the supremacy of one race. It will be shaped by the cooperation of many, by those who can set aside their differences and fight for a common cause." Aaron frowned, his brow furrowed. "Are you suggesting that humanity?" He paused, considering the words. "We're still too young, too new on the galactic stage. How can we be part of that change?" Genera's expression softened slightly, though it was hard to tell if it was truly empathy or simply the alien's nature. "Because you are human, Captain. Because of what you value, what you are willing to sacrifice. Your species, with all its flaws, has something the others do not. Hope. Hope that there is always a better way, a brighter tomorrow. I have watched you, I have studied you, and I see that you have something the old races have lost. A sense of renewal." The weight of her words hit him. He had never considered humanity to be exceptional. It was a young species, often reckless and quick to anger. But as Genera said, it was also a species that never gave up, no matter how dire the circumstances. And in a galaxy that had seen millennia of decay and ruin, that hope might be exactly what was needed. Rios cleared his throat, his voice cautious but filled with a newfound clarity. "So, what are we supposed to do now? You said we have the right to choose our own path. But what about the threats we saw in your trials? The other species, the war, the darkness that's creeping through the galaxy?" Genera's expression turned serious again, her eyes flicking to the vast view of the stars beyond the station. "You must prepare, Captain Solis. The universe is never static. Change is inevitable. And while you have proven yourselves worthy, you must still face the realities of this world. There are threats on the horizon, and they are coming whether you are ready or not." The crew was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. It was clear now that their trials weren't just tests to measure their worth. They were warnings, glimpses into the larger storm that was approaching. And now they stood at the precipice of something much larger than themselves. This was no longer just a mission of survival. It was about the fate of humanity and the galaxy. Dr. Jenkins stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "Then we fight. We've learned to adapt, to work together, and to protect what matters. We may be small, but we've always had the strength to change the course of events. If that's what it takes to survive this galaxy, then we'll fight for it." Aaron nodded, a spark of determination flickering in his chest. "We'll fight not for power but for peace. For the future we want to see. We'll prove to you that humanity has a place in this galaxy, not just as survivors but as protectors. As leaders." Genera's lips curved into a thin smile. "I believe you will, Captain. And that is why I have chosen to let you leave this station alive. You have the potential to shape the galaxy in a way that no one else can. But be warned, the road ahead will not be easy. You will face enemies, both known and unknown, and there will be sacrifices. But the strength you have shown here today will carry you through the darkest times." With that, she turned away, her form disappearing into the shadows of the station. Her final words lingered in the air like a prophecy, a challenge for the humans to prove themselves on the galactic stage. Aaron watched her leave, a weight settling on his shoulders. He could feel the enormity of what lay ahead, but he wasn't afraid. He had his crew, and together they were more than just a group of individuals. They were a family. And it was that bond, that shared strength, that would carry them forward. Turning to face his team, Aaron spoke with the confidence that had been forged in the crucible of Genera's trials. All right, everyone. We've earned the right to make our own choices. And now it's time to chart our course. We'll take what we've learned here and we'll use it to prepare for what's coming. Together. His crew nodded, their resolve echoing in their eyes. The trials had tested them. Genera had pushed them to the edge. But now they were ready. Ready to face whatever the universe threw their way. Together they would protect their future. And together they would ensure that humanity would rise above the darkness, stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. The crew of the Endurance turned toward the unknown expanse of space, ready for the next chapter of their journey. Their trials had only just begun. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.